ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, reporting tonight from the Middle East Peace Conference in Madrid.
Good evening. Crawling before walking. The Secretary of State, Jim Baker, who did so much to make this peace conference possible, said that was the way it was today when the Arabs and Israelis finally sat down with one another. Everyone here in Madrid has pretty much the same assessment of this first day. The progress is in the fact that they are here. The road ahead will be very long, and there are landmines everywhere. Today, everyone was craning to see how the Israelis and the Palestinians would react to one another. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds.
Is the solution...
So they finally sat down to look each other in the eye. There was Saeb Erekat, a Palestinian professor from Jericho, wearing an Arab keffiyeh, the symbol of Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation. Across the table sat Yitzhak Shamir, occasionally stealing a glance at his adversaries. There was Israeli delegate Sarah Doron, who told of having tried unsuccessfully to get a Lebanese counterpart to shake her hand today. They all appeared somewhat stiff, but out of the public eye it was apparently less adversarial. One delegate said the Palestinians and the Israelis had broken the ice during an unplanned encounter in the corridor.
It was very simple and very easy. We just shake hands and introduced ourselves to each other, and without any difficulties.
KHATIB said this day was a turning point.
I felt happy because when we used to meet with Israelis, they used to humiliate us back in the occupied territories. Now we are sitting on equal basis.
Both sides listened closely as George Bush spoke of the overriding need for compromise and of security for Israel. He carefully avoided any mention of Jewish settlements in the occupied territories.
I think on the whole this has been a very good day for the prospects for peace.
At the end of this first day, the Israelis were generally relieved. Tomorrow, the Israelis and the Palestinians will speak for themselves to each other. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, at the Royal Palace in Madrid.
It may seem to some people with no connection to the Middle East that all the attention devoted to who sits where, whether diplomats will be seen talking to one another, how long anyone may speak, is pretty petty stuff compared to the real issues. But there is so much intrigue in the Middle East that everything has a deeper meaning. In order to get this conference off the ground today, President Bush and the Secretary of State had to set the right tone for everyone. Here's ABC's John McCarthy.
The U.S. arranged for each delegation to arrive in separate motorcades. At the Palacio Real, they were ushered upstairs and kept carefully apart. Photographed from every angle, they seemed acutely aware that they were engaged in one of those experiments in history that, if successful, would change forever the Middle East. When they finally came together in one room, it was to a table laid out by the U.S. The Israelis, placed carefully between Egypt and Lebanon, were seated across from the Palestinians and Syrians. It was a table conveniently so wide that no one could be embarrassed by the offer of a handshake across it. It was the task of George Bush to set the tone, to carefully offer encouragement to each delegation, and then to challenge them to take a risk.
We seek peace, real peace. And by real peace, I mean treaties, security, diplomatic relations, economic relations, trade, investment, cultural exchange, even tourism.
Bush said exactly what Prime Minister Shamir wanted to hear. Shamir wants peace treaties with his Arab neighbors. What he does not want is to give up occupied Arab land to get it. The president said land must be part of the deal, a message the Arabs were eager to hear.
Peace will only come as the result of direct negotiations, compromise, give and take. We believe that territorial compromise is essential for peace.
The president said Palestinians must be allowed to have meaningful control over their lives. But far more important was the simple fact that the U.S. had placed the Palestinians at the table, symbolically elevating them to equal status with the nations seated around them. Now that the U.S. has successfully engineered the first phase of this peace conference, Secretary Baker is hard at work on the next critical step, one-on-one negotiations where real bargaining could begin. But as of tonight, he does not yet have agreement on where such meetings would be held or who would come. John McCarthy, ABC News, Madrid.
The Arabs, every bit as much as the Israelis, have been very difficult to pin down on what issues they will talk about, in what order, and even where. But as ABC's Pierre Salinger reports tonight, this was not a day for serious complaining.
Palestinians were disturbed that President Bush had not mentioned either negotiation on Jerusalem or settlements in the occupied territories, both vital issues they will put on the table. But for Hanan Ashrawi, the Palestinian spokesperson, Bush's speech was mostly favorable.
It presented a direct challenge to the Israelis on the question of territorial compromise. It stressed fairness to the Palestinians and legitimacy as a basis.
Jordanian Foreign Minister Kamal Abu Jaber agreed, but said it could have been stronger.
The speech on the whole, the spirit and the thrust of the speech was positive. Of course, I would have liked to see other things in it.
The Syrians complained that Bush failed to mention the Golan Heights, but they expressed optimism that progress could be made once bilateral talks begin.
All the participants in this peace conference must seize this golden opportunity in order to reach a just and comprehensive peace.
The Arabs got more of what they wanted from the Netherlands Foreign Minister Hans van der Broek, speaking for the European community. In a tough speech, he called for a halt to building Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. He also said the Palestinians were the principal victims of the Arab-Israeli conflict. With the conference now underway, Arabs no longer threaten to break up the negotiation over the issue of settlements. And Palestinian leaders now promise they will be the last to walk out, even if things go wrong. Pierre Salinger, ABC News, Madrid.
Later in the broadcast, from Israel to Iran, how the Middle East saw Madrid on television. Not all in the same way. Israelis and Palestinians in the occupied territories, how they fail to see each other. And in the day's other news, a report that 1 out of every 10 Americans is now on food stamps. We'll be back.